we successfully challenged the development and were able to put together funding. That was a miracle to purchase the property. And the result, of course, is the creation of Grace Cole Nature Park in 2006. 14 acres of protected wetlands with habitat viewing, trails, the annual salmon releases by elementary school kids. This is a treasure for our community that we're all really proud of. We've since then been engaged on a regular basis as a party of record on other RUE applications, but 2 recent applications have really renewed our concerns, and citizens as well have approached us with similar concerns. The first is the single family home that was built on 28th Avenue Northeast, just north of Grace Cole Park, that recently sold. That builder owner didn't do the mitigation that was required by the reasonable use exception grant. And in terms of the number of trees, the square footage of pervious surface that were required and other protections, they simply didn't happen. Flooding happened instead to the neighbors, and the creek was contaminated. A couple of months ago, the city issued a stop work order, but the owner sold the property without complying. And we're really wondering what happens in a case like this. Does mitigation still happen? Is the new owner going to be held to fulfill those requirements? Of course, the second property is the Jolene Jang property that next to her property that's going to be developed potentially by a builder owner. It's at 205th at the boundary of Lake Forest Park and Mount Lake Terrace. Line Creek runs through this parcel's entirety. And of course, this is all critical and sensitive area. What mitigation is going to be required, and will it be enough to prevent irreparable damage to habitat and creek? What other risks should be addressed by the developer? We're really concerned because some residents who have expertise in this area have expressed real concern that flooding could occur to all properties downstream. So some of the questions we've been investigating, and we hope that you will as well raise with the administration, are what are the current resources that the city has at hand to monitor and enforce the RUE laws.
I wanted to say thank you for your comments, and I'm going to give you a second just to wrap up, but I should remind everybody.
Okay, two more. Are code revisions necessary to ensure proper mitigation? And should developers who violate the code be allowed to then develop other properties in Lake Forest Park? Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you very much for making time to come out. Excellent. Let's see, and we've got a hand up by Dan Benson.
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, yeah, Dan Benson, 17868 40th Avenue Northeast, Forest Park. And I'm also very interested in the work that you're doing. I appreciate you looking at all these exception use policies and what needs to be improved there. I should start a list now of all the times I've seen various properties that I look to see what's been developing on there, and I think, gee, I thought we had rules against that, or you can't build that close to the creek, or gee, how come they're cutting down all these trees? And there's so many things like that. I keep thinking now, aren't there supposed to be rules that they're supposed to follow, or as the previous speaker said, there's some mitigation. And I also hear lots of stories of developers coming in, cut all the trees down, and then they plant small little trees that just get neglected and die in a few years. So the whole thing about trying to mitigate the tree canopy, it becomes a bit of a joke if there's no enforcement behind it. And it just, for developers, I think it just becomes, they add it into the cost of doing business. You know, so okay, it costs a little bit more if you're going to build in Lake Forest Park because you got to put in these little trees. But you know, in a few years, no one will know, no one will remember, and we'll just go on. So anyway, I think there's a lot of things like that that need to be reviewed. So I really appreciate you guys looking into that, and maybe you know, do some kind of surveys or get more input from people in the area to find out all these little anecdotal stories of things going on. Because there's, like, I've commented on a few projects where they put in a permit, and I've carefully, you know, composed my comments and sent them in, and I have no idea whatever happens to them if anyone ever even reads them, you know, things like that. So anyway, just my 2 cents. Thank you for the work you're doing, and keep it up.
Dan, thank you so much for your comments. Would you please, for the record, say your address? I can't remember if you said that at the beginning.
Okay, I did. It's 17868 40th Avenue Northeast.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't.
Yeah, no problem.
Listening. Is there anyone else that would like to speak here at the beginning of our meeting? I don't see any other hands. I want to thank everybody who's spoken. I definitely, I know we all hear your concern, and we appreciate that you're going to follow along. As you can see from our agenda, I just do want to note, if this is a key interest for many of the people who are attending, that tonight we have a priority on working through our work on the sign code. Our hope is to sort of finalize the parts that you know, we feel like we can you know, turn into recommendations for the council, and then set a hearing for that work. Our hope is to finish that you know, within an hour or so, and have time then to have City Attorney Pratt and Planning Director Bennett start us off on sort of an education session on our RUE, which serves as a beginning for this body of work. So I hope you'll stick around, but I did want to just, you know, signal that if the sign code takes longer, we are committed to seeing that through so that we can get a hearing scheduled. So I'll do my best to move us along, and hopefully we'll be able to get through our whole agenda tonight. Okay. With that, I think we are ready to move into this document that Director Bennett sent around, which is a new copy reflecting the most recent edits. So I don't know, Steve, do you or City Attorney Pratt want to lead us as I think we're doing a page by page, everybody.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to City Attorney Pratt. And the goal is just to hopefully just kind of go through page by page, see if there's anything anybody doesn't you know, remember being what came out of the meeting, and talk about those. And but to the extent we can, if we can move sort of at you know, by through each page, just and not go through everything that's in there, just what, you know, is of concern to any of you, that would be helpful in meeting the goal that you just set, Chair Larson. So with that, Kim, you go ahead and I will share the screen.
Actually, just wanted to note, we've for all of the commissioners here, we have gone through this document multiple times. I wanted to note that at our last conversation, Councilmember Bodie did indicate and signal that the council is very likely going to start from scratch as they look at the sign code, and that we don't have to solve everything. If there are some sticky wickets or things where we're kind of leaning this way or that way, it's okay for us not to get to resolution on those. A resolution could be, let's mark that and note that for the council. And so I didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. If we didn't have consensus on a point, we can turn some of those items into a few different options for the council to consider when they take on the work. Is that a fair approach, Attorney Pratt?
Oh, definitely a fair approach. I don't think I would say that council starts from scratch with what the planning commission gives them. They do begin at ground zero with their analysis. They have to learn it just as you did, but they definitely take your recommendations to heart, want to know why you did them. If they change something, you know, it's for a policy reason that they're taking into consideration. So I'll just clarify it that way, but certainly you
Right.
could send on different options or explanations to council as you want to. Yeah. While, let's see, I don't know if Steve has it up yet, but I'm going to start with, I wanted to give you guys an update on that Supreme Court case on off-premises signs. And we thought that decision was going to come out in June. It came out late April or early May. It wasn't leaked. It actually came out, was signed. And it tells us basically you can still regulate for off-premises signs. I know one of the commissioners here definitely said, wait, you'd have to read it to know that it was off premises. And that is true, but the Supreme Court said, that's taking our prior decisions too extreme. You're only reading it for the neutral purpose of finding out the location of the business or event to see if it's an off-premises sign, and you can do that. So that was, since in the current code we prohibit off-premises signs, and in the draft code that you've got going right now you prohibit off-premises signs. So I would say under the very most recent law you are still able to do that. So just wanted to give you that update. Then also, I will start then with section 1. There you go. Okay, so I'm gonna just take the definitions. You've had these definitions for quite a while. I know you're all familiar with them. So the definitions are on page 1 through 5. We took out all the old definitions that relied on content, and instead we replaced them with more definitions that went to what's the form of the sign, or what's the material it's made of, how large can it be, things like that. So is there any questions on section 1, all of the definitions that we changed? No? Okay. Section 2, that's page 5 and 6 of this draft. They are the prohibited signs. We defined a lot of these now, and the animated signs are prohibited, video signs are prohibited, off-premises signs prohibited. So we're just listing those out. Any question on section 2, the prohibited signs? Okay. We'll go with section 3. These are the exemptions from permitting. It's on page 6 through 8 of the draft you've got. Don't have to get a permit for your sign if you're just repairing it. Or the big one is the temporary signs that are 3 feet by 4 feet. You don't have to get a permit for. Any questions on those exemptions? Okay.
I ask a question? Maybe I'm misreading this, but for the temporary signs, it says no greater than 3 square feet in area per side and no more than 4 feet. Okay, so it can be 4 feet tall, and each side can only be 3 square feet total.
Yeah, we're assuming double-sided.
And then the height restriction. Okay, great, thank you.
Yep. Okay, then section 4 is on page 8 and 9 of this draft. And it's where we put the temporary sign regulations that apply everywhere, unless a specific different code section contemplates something different. But these really apply everywhere in the city to temporary signs. The new item that I don't think you have talked about much is item F. That's where we had talked about this concept and wording it right. And I think I just kept telling you that I would work on it, and we've got it in there now. So signs pertaining to an event, occasion, or similar occurrence with a beginning and or ending date shall be removed within 10 calendar days after the ending date. Trying to capture, we want them removed. I also think that Supreme Court case helps us there, because we're only looking at that sign to see what date the event is over, not for really content. So we could use that if we had to. Okay, I see a Melissa question, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a question about the fencing, no signs on fences. Is there, and I'm sorry if we talked about this and I just don't remember, is there a reason why somebody can't post a sign on their fence? I guess I was thinking specifically like if somebody put private drive or no soliciting or something like that. Is there a reason why there's no signs on fences?
That was just the policy I heard from the discussion by planning commission. Certainly it's not required, but that's the end result I heard.
Okay. I guess I'm sorry if I don't remember that part.
Oh, that's fine, yeah. You guys can revisit that if you want to.
Lois, did you have something on this topic?
No, I just wanted to, well, actually, I just wanted to throw out, maybe with the temporary signs, the sandwich boards, removing them in the evening so they're not out there 24 hours. Just a thought. I'd seen that in some other city codes. So they're just, yeah, not sitting out. Anyways, just a thought. Thanks.
Yeah,
Sure.
and we do have that in the TC zone for them to be removed. After business hours, and not generally before dawn or after dusk. We could add that into other places, but right now that is just in the TC zone. Okay. Did we want to talk about this fences on signs anymore?
I think so. Walker.
Signs on fences, how about that?
Yeah, I was actually going to follow up to that question.
Great.
And I think it might be helpful to clarify that these restrictions are just on temporary signs, because if they would be on a structure like a fence or a building, they would be covered under the permanent sign restrictions in whatever zone they're in.
I think this is one of those topics where we didn't have full clarity, because we talked about as if a sign was on a house, like no soliciting, it didn't get counted against as a temporary, it became part of the structure. So I wonder if in this case we can flag this as a, there are implications both ways on this item. And I wonder if we need to solve that or simply flag it as something for the council to consider.
I think that I think as Walter is alluding to, that not only are there permitted signs that could possibly be on fences, but there's also exempt signs that, those 5 signs in the residential area. I don't think there's any prohibition of the exempt signs being on fences. This is just for temporary signs that don't meet that exempt. Is that a fair characterization, Kim?
Actually, the exempt signs have to meet these other regulations as well.
Okay.
I think we also talked about with fences, it was a little problematic because there's imagery that is a message. And then there are also, I think north of Ballinger, I think there is at least one fence that has messaging on it that's done as an artistic expression, but it also has actual content. And so I think in our previous conversations, if I recall correctly, we were a little perplexed on how to treat fences, and particularly where we have art and imagery on fences that convey a message. Does anybody have thoughts about this? we've talked about it before. Melissa, can we circle back to you and get your input?
I guess like my thought is, you know, since I was thinking about like residential areas and not really businesses, and people, you know, if it's their residence and the fence is clearly on their property, and they should, you know, to sort of dictate, you know, the whole, like, you know, not being able to put temporary signs. And to me, the verbiage in here is confusing. Like, I am personally confused, but, you know, I guess I could go back and muddle through it and understand it. But for somebody who's not going through these meetings, to me, the verbiage here is confusing.
Well, as City Attorney Pratt just said, so these are restrictions that you can, you know, leave in or take out. So if you take on fences out, that would mean that someone could put a 3 square foot sign on their fence. So if the Planning Commission doesn't have any concerns about that, you can just let us know if there's a consensus to delete on fences. And that's what you would be allowing is that 3 square foot, 4 foot tall sign.
My personal opinion is I would like on fences to remain.
Let's see, David or TJ, do you have any contribution to this topic? Do you have a preference? David, preferences?
I'd say keep the languages, keep in fences on in the language.
Okay, Attorney Pratt, if somebody has a, like, you know, front point security on their fence to notify people that the property is being monitored or something like that, would that be considered exempt based on the other signs that we said you could have on your private property?
Exempt. I mean, technically, I'd say it doesn't fall under an exempt sign.
I think we said you can have 5 of these.
Right. So when we get to residential, yeah, you can have 5 temporary signs on, or 5 of these 3x4 signs on your property.
Could you
This
put
would
them on your
still say
fence?
you can't, what?
And then could you put them on your fence as long as they were one of those? Okay.
No, because this says you can't put them on fences. So temporary signs can't go on fences
Okay.
as it reads right now.
Commissioner Lee, would you like to contribute to this topic?
Yeah, I was under the impression that we're talking strictly about temporary signs, but then the permanent signs, you're allowed up to 5 on your property. So if you're talking about permanent exempt signs, then I guess that's how I read it, that
Right.
you could have a permanent sign on your fence. And I don't know, that's how I interpreted. Thanks.
Let's see, Commissioner Cluno.
Maddie, it's Clovino, but you can
Well,
matter. So I'm just thinking, so temporary signs would be something like a yard sale sign, right? A permanent sign, that would be an exempt, and I hope that this you can confirm that this is correct. A permanent sign would be something like "Beware of Dog," that might be on a fence. Is this what we're thinking? Like the difference between a temporary sign that would be, I mean, a permanent sign that would be exempt versus a sign that would be temporary, such as a yard sale sign?
Yeah, I think you're on the right track. We'd have to look at, so temporary sign is not permanently affixed.
Yeah.
Designed, capable of being moved. Sandwich boards, lawn signs, similar signs. So if you're saying hanging up a happy birthday banner, shouldn't go on your fence, you know, hanging on your garage. So I think you're right there that most temporary signs aren't going to be put up on the fence because they're not going to meet that definition. If it's something permanently affixed, like your security sign, that'll be a different sign. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's always a way around it. You know, you can take your temporary yard sign and screw it to your fence.
There
and
you
then,
go.
And then, you know, unscrew it, on Monday. So I mean, there's always ways
Can I
around
just,
it.
just to determine how much time we need to spend here, can I do with a, have a show of hands for those that are interested in keeping item or line 41 on fences in our recommendations? It's how it is in the code today. So hands up if you're interested in keeping it in the code. Hands up if you'd like to see it, item 2 on fences taken out. Okay, so I think we should just leave it in and call it good. If the council would like to revisit that, they'd be welcome to. But can we move along?
Section 5 then, that's on pages 9 through 10 of your draft. It's the residential multifamily and residential single family zones. So these are the signs and how you've decided you want them in these 2 zones. And this is where we started inserting duration, size, and quantity from the chart you filled out in your last month's meeting. So temporary signs in these zones, you can do the 3x4 signs for an indefinite duration, a maximum of 5. Signs that are no greater than 6x4, you can have up for 30 days in a 1-year period and no more than 1 of those. So that's what we got when you guys went through that chart. David, did you have a question or just didn't put your hand down? Sorry.
I didn't put my hand down. I apologize.
Okay. Okay, looks like we got that right from the chart. Okay. Then section 6, that's on page 10 through 12. It's the CC zone and the BN zone. And section E is the temporary signs. So no greater than 6x4. You can have it up for no more than 60 days in a 1-year period with a maximum of 2 at any one time. Any questions on CC and BN? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Section 7 is the TC zone, town center zone. That's on page 12 through 15 of your draft. And section H deals with the temporary signs. Again, not to exceed 6x4 feet. Can't be up more than 60 days in a 1-year period. For business hours, not before dusk, not after dark. 1 per business at the vehicle entrances, 1 per business at the pedestrian entrances. And then we added a new 6 here. If the number of signs at a vehicle or pedestrian entrance is impeding free movement or causing a safety issue, the city may remove the problematic sign or signs without prior notice to the business owner. So you guys had talked about if there's just too many signs there, because we're allowing 1 per business, that it could cause a problem, even though we haven't experienced that in the past, it could. And so this would say, this would let people know right up front, the city could just remove all the signs if it gets to be a safety issue. But that wording wasn't before you at your last meeting. Any questions? Okay.
Just to make sure on your 3 and 4 there, if they have 2 doors and 1 driveway, they could have 3 signs up. Is that correct?
3, can you say that again?
If they had 2 doors and 1 driveway, they could have 3 signs up. Is that correct?
3 and 4. Per business located on the premises at each vehicular entrance. It's the vehicular entrance of the town center zone. So of the zone for the lot.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure where, where are you finding door as being an operative term, Ira?
Well, it says at the entrance. And so I was assuming that was entrance to their business. So if a business had two entrances, they could have one at each entrance. Is that correct? And then,
No. We were talking about different entrances, and maybe that needs to be clarified. We were talking about pedestrian
Well,
entrances only on these perimeter areas along Bothell Way and Ballinger Way. So not on the, I don't know of any businesses that are right there.
oh, there's not, but I was confused about that.
Uh-huh.
I want to make sure that if what you're saying is around the perimeter of town center, you're not saying the actual store itself.
Right. So maybe 4 and 5, it sounds like could be misunderstood.
Maybe we add in something like to the entrances to the shopping center, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, how many parcels are there that aren't in the shopping center? I know there's not very many. Is it like 2?
It's I'd have to go back and check. I know that we talked about that before. But you know, there's definitely, I think the gas station is on town center, but it's a separate parcel, I believe. And then the realtor, the Windermere is a separate parcel. So
so maybe we'll just,
I understand how it reads. I just want to make sure that it can't be misconstrued or something says, well, I can put them at my front door. I mean, I know it says the perimeter, but.
Walter, do you have a comment on point?
Yes, there are 5 parcels plus the Marlone Geyer parcel. So there's 6 total in town center.
okay.
So what
So
do
we
you-
could,
go ahead, Walter, can you just tell us, besides the 2 that are Malone Geyer, it says Windermere, there's the gas station, what else do you see?
There's the Bank of America and
Okay.
City Hall and Starbucks.
oh yeah,
Right.
Starbucks, separate parcel.
I think if we just, you know, we just provide clarifying languages related, especially to the really outlying parcels where there's a road separating them, that might be helpful to address this point. But we'll have to probably get back to you at the next meeting with some clarifying language.
Do we need item 5 though? Aren't all the pedestrian entrances effectively also vehicular entrances, or am I missing something?
No, there's bus stop entrance at Starbucks, and then a sidewalk entrance, you know, right there by City Hall, that you'd come off the street. There may be those are like the only ones that are, you know, really strictly pedestrian, as I remember. Otherwise, they are kind of joint entrances where you have a sidewalk and a vehicular entrance together.
Okay.
But yeah, this hasn't really been an issue. So I guess you know, we could face some someone reading the language really close, maybe have a problem, but we'll see if we can come up with some clarifying language on those. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ira. Okay, now section 8. It's on page 15 and 16. That's the Southern Gateway Zone. And what we did there was just kind of bring that in. They have their separate regulations, but we wanted to bring them into the sign code chapter as well. So they refer to here, for single family, they refer to the RM and RS zones. And then for Southern Gateway Corridor, they refer to the TC zone and then their design guidelines. Any questions there? No? Okay. Section 9. These are the right-of-way signs, page 16 and 17. So we tried to make it clear these are only temporary signs. And then item 1 through 5 there deal really with the location of the sign and how you install them. Then item 6 says no more than 6 signs for any event or occasion. 7, it's a 3x4 sign.
Will you clarify point 6, Attorney Pratt, in you know, that's in one vicinity in one area, is that right?
Yes. It's
Right.
not, I mean, it's hard because it's right away, but we didn't want somebody laying out 20 signs in one area and kind of taking up all this popular right-of-way space in an area, but
I just wondered if we needed that clarification that we don't mean citywide, we mean within a discrete zone.
Well, the way I would interpret it is citywide at this point, but you might be hard pressed to to verify that.
You mean you can't have more than 6 signs citywide for the same event?
Yeah,
In
if
the
they're
right
in the
of way.
right of way. Yeah, that's so that's actually more signs than we allow with our special event signs, where people, you know, they apply for a special event and say they want to put sandwich boards at these locations. That process just allows 4. So this is more than that, but I think we would interpret it, you know, that just because Windermere has a number of sites of houses that are having open houses, those will all be different events. For each open house is a separate event, so I don't think anybody would feel compelled to go after the Windermere signs because there was more in the
Right.
city any given Sunday or
So-
Saturday.
Should we just add then to that item citywide, just so it's clear that it's across this?
We can make it clear it's citywide, yeah,
Okay,
that would be
All right.
better.
I think we can keep moving.
You put a limit on the 3x4 signs in number 7. So if they're 3x4, you can have them up for 30 days in a 1-year period. If you don't want to get a permit, if you want to get a permit, you can have it up for longer than 30 days. It would then fall under number 8. Those signs are allowed to be displayed 60 days in a 1-year period, and those can't be larger than the standard 6x4 feet. Any questions, concerns there? Okay. Section 10. This is page 17. Permit application and fees. We just made it, we gave it a kind of a standard permit application. The fees will be in council's resolution. And we went through and we were going to simplify it for some of the signs, but it's pretty clear that some of these more complicated things on the application just don't apply to temporary signs. You're not going to have to do too much to tell us how you're going to install it and things like that. So should work. Okay, any questions? Then the last one, section 11, that's on page 18. And we just amended that to bring it more in line with what council had just recently done for fines for their personal flotation devices. And we made sure that it's a civil infraction. Also brings it in line with the personal flotation devices. That's it. There's no questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, are there any lingering questions before we make a decision on scheduling a hearing? Okay, well, seeing none, I would say, Director Bennett, that we're ready to make the few clarifications that we discussed tonight and use that next version as the document to send out for public review and then a hearing. You and I had talked about whether or not to schedule a special hearing or to do that hearing at our next meeting. Is there any additional thought on that?
I don't think that there's any overwhelming reason to schedule other than at your next regular meeting. So I think the second Tuesday in June would be fine.
Excellent. So I think commissioners will schedule that hearing for the beginning of our meeting, and we will leave time on our agenda for discussing anything that we may hear either through written comment leading up to the hearing or at the hearing itself. If we don't hear any objections or recommendations for changes, it would be ideal for us then to formalize these and send them on to council as recommendations. But like I said, if we hear something that's concerning that needs our attention, we can certainly use our time that way as well. Does that sound good to everybody in terms of an approach? All right. So Director Bennett, you'll put out the public hearing notice and advertise that. And then Attorney Pratt, will you have enough time to make those few changes and have that ready? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it'd be great to get that noticed as soon as possible. It's a kind of a tricky code, and I think there are a lot of changes. May I ask for a public hearing? Is there an opportunity to provide like a cover letter, if you will, to sort of explain what changed, why we're looking at it, and provide a little bit of background before people jump into reviewing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll use the memo I usually create with your agenda items to explain kind of what the focus has been for the Planning Commission.
Okay.
And then also plan to send it out to businesses as well. Proactively get it to folks in the town center and real estate agents, as was suggested at the last meeting. Now that we know kind of what you're looking at.
That sounds great. Okay. We can check off this agenda item. Thank you, everybody, for your work on this, particularly City Attorney Pratt and Director Bennett. I know there have been a number of iterations to this and some education that you've needed to do for us. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to new business, which is, as I mentioned in March and again at our April meeting, our starting place for this particular work item that's on our work plan for this year. And Director Bennett and I talked about a week and a half ago about some basics to cover in this overview so that we have a working understanding of what state law says and how this is working within our community. What I would ask from each of you is to keep track of some questions you have, and that will help us shape conversations in the future. So we don't need to take up all the questions tonight. I'd love to see us stay focused on the nuts and bolts, like, what does the state law say? What doesn't it say? And, use tonight's meeting to better understand what's happening today, which can then take us into beefier questions at our next work session. Does that sound good? All right, it's all you, City Attorney Pratt. I think you're on deck first to help us understand the state law.
Sure. And I think Steve has some slides. We're going to start with why we have a reasonable use exception, and then we will go through the specific code criteria in LFP's code. So next slide. you guys only get to deal with the very weighty issues. So this is again a constitutional issue for you. With the signs, it was First Amendment, and now you're dealing with the Washington's taking clause. Article 1, Section 16. No private property shall be taken or damaged for public or private use without just compensation having first been made. And in Washington, a land use regulation which goes too far, is too drastic, curtails an owner's use of his or her own property, can cause a constitutional taking. And what we're looking at is, so those are called, we have physical takings. I think we all know those. City is going to put a road through the middle of your house. They have taken your lot. They must pay for your house and your land. Physical taking, easy to comprehend. Regulatory takings are a little bit harder to see sometimes. If the city changes regulations, so now your entire lot is wetlands and you cannot build on there, that could be considered a takings. So taking by regulation, not physical taking. And what we're looking at for a regulatory taking is, has the city's decision denied an owner a fundamental property attribute? Can you no longer possess your property? Can you no longer exclude others? Can you no longer dispose of your property? And here's the big one for us with reasonable use. Can you no longer make some economically viable use of your property? And if you can't, that can be considered a taking. The landlord has the burden of showing that just the enactment of the regulation caused the taking. Okay, so the next slide. So reasonable use exceptions are used when the regulation would prevent any reasonably viable economic use of the property. So we bring in the RUE so that we can prevent a taking of the property by the city, but still allow the smallest, I'll say this just kind of in generally, the smallest amount of use of the property we can allow. Lake Forest Park's reasonable use exception is found in section 16.16.250. And we'll go through this piece by piece. And I've got a couple other things inserted in here, but we really will go through this piece by piece. So section A, if the application of this chapter will prevent any reasonable economic use of the owner's property, let's go back to A, Steve.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there we go. So if the chapter 16.16 is going to prevent any reasonable economic use, the applicant can apply for a reasonable use exception. And that application is processed like we process other applications in chapter 16.26. Okay, next slide. So this shows us what are the things that we're regulating in chapter 16.16 that can cause a taking. So critical areas, wetlands, streams, fish and wildlife habitat, frequently flooded areas, geological hazard areas, there's quite a few of those, buffers that protect all these critical areas. And it also applies to critical areas that are on neighboring lots. So the neighbor might have a wetland on their lot, but the buffer extends over to your lot. So we look at that as well. And then there is also a separate RUE process for trees in chapter 16.14. Okay, next slide. So then section B, the planning director takes the application along with the records submitted to the city and the director's recommendation and passes that along to the hearing examiner for a decision. So what's in the record that's going to go to the hearing examiner? It's going to be the application itself, all the expert reports from the applicant, all the expert peer review reports that the city has had done if it doesn't have an expert on staff, any written public comment that's been received by the city prior to the hearing in front of the hearing examiner. And based all of that, the director is going to make his recommendation to the hearing examiner. So all of that information goes to the hearing examiner. Next slide. The hearing examiner uses the process that council has outlined in chapter 1626 to hear these and make a decision on these applications. So this is a type 1 quasi-judicial hearing. So quasi-judicial hearing examiner is sitting as if a judge in a case. Type 1 means it has a fairly formal public hearing that's open to the public. Written comments can be submitted. There will be witness testimony, public testimony, cross-examination, exhibits filed, and briefing done by all of the parties. So it's a fairly formal process. The hearing examiner has deadlines in his rules that everyone must comply with. And I will say for public testimony, the hearing examiner the city uses now, he will specify a time for the public testimony. So he'll say, 1 o'clock on Tuesday. No matter what we're in the middle of, I'm going to listen to public testimony. He tries to give the public a heads up as to, so you don't have to sit there all day. So he tries to let people know when it's going to start. In the code section, the applicant must prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the application merits approval or approval with modification. So it has to meet the criteria by a preponderance of the evidence. That is less than the criminal standard of reasonable doubt, but that is what you would see in all cases like this. It would be a preponderance of the evidence. In my head, I think of that as 51%. The proposition asserted must more probably be true than not. Okay. Then back to the criteria. The hearing examiner, when he is dealing with all this information, he's looking at these criteria. C, 1, the application of the requirements of this chapter will deny all reasonable economic use of the property. So it can't just be, I don't have enough room for my McMansion. It has to be all reasonable economic use is being denied, not just I can't build a big enough house. Number 2, there is no other reasonable economic use with less impact on the critical area. For residentially zoned property, this usually isn't a big issue because the use is going to be residential. Commercial, things zoned commercial, that can come into play. I had a case where somebody wanted to put 3 multi-story buildings in some critical areas when obviously the city was going to say no, 1 and smaller is going to be a viable, economically viable use. But in residential, you're looking at can a home be built? And well, C3, proposed development does not pose an unreasonable threat to public health, safety, or welfare on or off the proposed site, consistent with the general purposes of this chapter and the comprehensive plan. So that's where a lot of neighborhood testimony is going to be heard about, what is going to happen downstream. I heard that in public comment. Maybe a neighbor worried about potential slide of something onto their property that's adjacent. So you're looking at, the hearing examiner is going to be specifically looking at those kind of threats. And then 4, any alteration is the minimum necessary to allow for reasonable economic use on the property. That really is case by case based on the property. We did have the last reasonable economic use I did with the city. The hearing examiner said, minimum use, you get a carport, you don't need a garage. The carport has less environmental impacts on the site, and carport it is. Next slide. Then D, again, minimum necessary extent. So he's going to be looking at that multiple times, the hearing examiner is. And hearing examiner, he can place conditions on the application and granting it. This says condition on recommendations by the city. He's definitely looking at those. We do hear, I'd say, new information comes up during hearings sometimes, and the city will agree, yes, a condition should be changed this way or a new condition that way. And there can be, a lot of give and take during the hearing itself. And that gives you the basics of the reasonable use exception. I'm happy to answer questions, or I know Nick has some more information for you. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Attorney Pratt, could you clarify? I mean, I think I have as good of an understanding as I can right now on reasonable economic use, but this piece with mitigation has always been a question for me, that at what point, like if you're supposed to mitigate your impacts, that it feels like an area that could be interpreted many different ways. And are there terms or rules or precedents that say, how much mitigation can you require? Like, can you require absolute mitigation of the impacts, or are you only allowed to require like some mitigation? Like, where is that?
Well, I think that's in these cases, usually relies on a lot of expert testimony. And so it does become a little less nebulous when you've got a wetland biologist saying, to mitigate the impacts to this buffer, they need to provide X amount of buffer in another place on the site or elsewhere. And so they can give us better parameters, so it's not quite so nebulous. And really, then we're able to say to the hearing examiner, this is what they need to do to mitigate. And their expert may be saying something different. You're on mute.
So what you're saying is it comes from expert testimony that helps us truly understand what is adequate mitigation.
Yes.
And that expert testimony, is that ours or theirs?
It could be both. We start with theirs, and then if the city has some concerns, we can have what we call a peer review, where we have our own biologist or arborist or geotechnical engineer review the mitigation requirements.
Thank you. David, do you have a comment?
Maddie, just a comment for you. I think this is where a lot of the burden comes on citizens within Lake Forest Park to actually bring that information to a potential hearing. And I think that's something that I think it's a really good question. To continue to ponder, like, what is that information that somebody might need to bring to a potential mitigation or hearing, I should say.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and one thing I'd also like to say, well, first of all, Attorney Pratt, thank you so much for that overview. I thought it was a really great overview, and given how much I've been exposed to this, I still have questions, and with that, I'm wondering, Matt, if well, first of all, will you be sending out this deck to all of us so that we can to review it?
We can definitely do that, yeah.
Great. So I'm wondering if we could do that and like write down all of our questions, because I have a ton of questions, but I don't want to bog down this conversation. So I'm wondering if it would be useful if we could send you, after we review this deck and reflect on this conversation a bit, if we could send y'all the questions that we have and to help us prepare for the conversation at the next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can send them through me, and I'll make sure that we get them answered by the right person.
Okay.
Thanks. I think that's a good idea, David, just because many of us might have the same questions, and we can sort of categorize them and tackle them a little more strategically. Did you have anything else before I move on to Melissa?
No, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Cranmer.
Yeah, so my question is, so that was helpful, by the way, that presentation, thank you. Because I was trying to find information on the website and I was having trouble finding anything. But I guess my question is, like, after the whole process is said and done, is there going to be separate materials on that? Like, what happens, like, okay, so you have given this exception, and the onus is on the homeowner to abide by that, but then, like, what happens after that? Are we going to be discussing those steps as well?
Yeah, Nick's presentation is going to get into kind of the review process and then an example of a site plan and how it changed before and after the hearing,
Okay, thanks.
what the conditions were. So
I think is our goal still, Director Bennett, to see if there are any questions for City Attorney Pratt, and if there's not, let her go, and then you'll move on to the second presentation. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Go ahead. If there are more questions for City Attorney Pratt, now's a good time.
Okay. Thank you so much for that presentation, and we really appreciate all the things you do on our behalf. It's always a very helpful education. You're obviously welcome to stick around. We just wanted to be mindful of that, using you to the highest and best purposes. So,
all right. Thanks, you guys. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Kim. Bye-bye.
Okay, it's all you.
Okay. Yeah.
Commissioner Hicks, before he gets started, did you have a question? I noticed your hand went up and then down.
I did. I think I'll hold off until after Nick's presentation.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, Nick, should I go ahead and share the screen?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, so this might be a little difficult to see here, but what we wanted to do was give you guys sort of a graphic representation of the review process for the RUE. And so it starts at the upper left-hand corner, and it basically starts with a pre-application meeting where the applicant approaches us, staff, describes their proposal, and we give them feedback on their concept, basically. We don't ask them necessarily to put a lot of research or professional materials together for this process. We just want to get an idea of the concepts. We give them some direction and indicate to them procedurally what they'll have to go through, identify them the codes that they'll need to comply with, and sort of describe for them what the process is going to be so they get an idea about it. And ultimately, we're in contact with them after that process and working with them to shape their application so they can get to as complete as possible. And the next step to the left, which is the purple box there, is the submittal of the application. And so then after that, we'd have 28 days to review the application for completeness. And if we identify anything in the materials that's incomplete or something that's missing, or we determine that we need more information, we tell them that and we describe to them why we need it. So it gives them an opportunity to come back and represent the information. So this part of the process, if the application gets determined incomplete, if you follow the arrows, it sort of loops around, and this can continue if the application continues to be incomplete. Once it is deemed complete, we send a completeness letter to the applicant, and that's the date that their application is determined complete. And this is important because if you look over to the left, it has we're required to process these land use decisions within 120 days. So at the time the application is determined complete, we have 120 days of clocked time to process these land use actions. And if we do ask the application for any additional information, the clock would stop. So that's an important thing to understand, I guess. So once the completeness letter is sent to the applicant, the application is complete, we can start reviewing it for consistency with the regulations, because we don't want to make any decisions without complete information, basically. This is where the public notice of application is required. So we notice the application to the public, and the code requires us that we do this in several ways. We publish it in the paper, we email it to parties of record, we post the site, we put it on our website. So basically, so the public can get notification, and for the purpose of soliciting their comments. So we field all of the public comment through the notice period and all the way up to the hearing, in fact. And so people can comment on the nature of the proposal. Basically, they could say whatever they want, and the examiner will determine which comments have weight. And we also look at them too, and provide our perspective on which comments have some weight in the decision-making process. So then we're continuing to evaluate the application for consistency with our regulations. And if we determine that the application is not consistent with the development regulations, we send them a letter requesting the information and citing the code section which supports our request. And then this can also continue for a while. So you see, as you follow the arrows down, you observe another loop here. So if there's an issue with the application that can't be resolved, or they have to revise their design maybe 1 or 2 times to finally gain compliance, or get it to the point where we can condition it for an approval, there may be a couple of cycles that it's not uncommon to see a couple of cycles there. Once the application is determined consistent with the development regulations, or it can be conditioned to, staff prepares our recommendation for the hearing that City Attorney Pratt described. And we also prepared the pre-filed hearing record and noticed the public hearing with all the pre-filed exhibits. And so when the hearing is conducted, the examiner has 10 days to issue his decision. And then he also incorporates any public testimony that occurs at the hearing, combined with the pre-filed exhibits to base on his decision on.
So Nick, one thing that doesn't really appear in your chart here is that there is a notice of public hearing as well. I think is that 14 days before the hearing?
Yeah. So that is true. When we prepare our recommendation and notice the public hearing, we must do that 14 days prior to the hearing date.
Right. And that's when anybody who has commented during the notice of application period, or even up to that point, it would also get a notice, sent to them as well, that the hearing has been scheduled.
Yeah, any party of record that was recorded during the notice of application period would get sent all correspondence that we send to the applicant. So it's basically like they're blind copied on everything that we send to the applicant. And in the case study that we're going to review next, there were 50 parties of record that we were sending out all of our correspondence to during the review process. So once you become a party of record during the notice of application period, you're sort of tagged to the project for the entirety of it, and you get sent all the correspondence that we send.
Okay, should we move on? Any questions about the process, or should we keep
Any
going?
questions? Yeah.
Commissioners, does anybody have any questions about this flow chart or the process that they use to take on the applications?
Not at this point.
I have one question, Nick, on this chart with the kind of the light blue boxes. It looks like where you might kick back to the application. It says application not consistent with applicable development regulations and comprehensive plan, and then the applicant can resubmit and come back into your process. What does that look like for the public? How do they know if anything's changed? How do they know what the most current sort of communications and plans are that are being considered? How are they?
Yeah, so I think I understand what you're saying. Is like, how does the public know we're requesting additional information, and how do they know how the designs change? if you become a party of record during the notice of application period, then like I said, you'll be blind copied on any communication that we send to the applicant. And so you'll know what we're asking for. On top of that, what we really can't control is when they come back in. So, they could come in like 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 day, 3 months, 3 years later. There's no like expiration date or lapse date on these applications. So they can sometimes linger. And so if you're curious about when stuff comes back in, it's best to be proactive and ask staff about it.
So are you suggesting that in that 14-day notice period, or that period of time where we have 14 days as a community to comment or become a party of record, that we need to do that? And if we don't exercise the right to become a party of record during that 14 days, we wouldn't know about any of the back and forth that would then transpire before it went to a hearing examiner.
Yeah, that's what I would say. That's correct.
Well, that's not really what we do in practice. If somebody submits a comment at any time between this notice of application and the day of the hearing, we're making them a party of record. Isn't that fair to say, Nick?
Yeah, I would say fair to say, but there has been instances where, because there's a specific comment period, I've had examiners not entertain comments submitted after the deadline for the comment period. But like Steve says, in practice, we include everything. And no matter when somebody comments, we continue to make them a party of record. We just designate when that happens. So, and when we leave it up to the examiner to decide what comments have how much weight.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then I have a follow-up question to that. If you can only comment during that 14-day period, if you all have in those blue boxes below the not consistent with an applicant resubmittal, if there are things happening during that process that a community member would want to make comment on, it sounds like I now know how they would, stay in the loop on what sorts of things are being resubmitted. But if they have a comment, are they needing then to hold all of those comments until the hearing at that point? I mean, officially speak,
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Yeah, if they want to provide additional comment, we're certainly receptive to receiving it. It just depends on, I think it just depends on what's the most efficient way to do that. If they feel like giving it to staff is the most efficient way, we can include a record of that in our hearing record to the examiner with the pre-filed exhibits. But some people like to testify in open hearing and get their point across that way. So it just sort of depends. We're always receptive to receive information. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, every comment will be made every written comment will be made part of the record. We just put everything in the record for the hearing examiner.
Thank you.
All right, so we talk about this case study, Nick?
Yeah, so this one is a little bit different because it deals with a reasonable use exception from the tree code, but essentially it gets applied the same way. We would almost do it the same way for some, like if this were up to be a wetland or something. But we thought that this was a good example because you get to see sort of the evolution of the project and how the design changed from one step to the other. And then actually what came out of it via the public hearing and examiner's decision. So this project was the Crane reasonable use exception. It was a non-conforming lot off of 178th in the 15,000 zone. So you could see the lot is significantly under 15,000 square feet. It started off as non-conforming lot, which doesn't have any bearing on its ability to be developed under the code. But it's just worth mentioning because it's an undersized lot for that zone. It had 2 exceptional trees on it. This particular version of the site plan that we see up right here, it only shows the one 52-inch Doug fir. There was another one to this, to the, I guess
right here.
The north, yeah, or to the northeast, or southeast rather, with an overlapping root zone. That's what you see here. The tree itself is the dot in the middle, and then these circles that you see around it are the corresponding root zones. So you can see how big this can get, these root zones. You can see how much of these properties they can start to take up here. This particular dug fir is 52 inches, which equates to a 52-foot root zone radius. The inner circle is what's referred to as the interior critical root zone, and it's half the distance of the critical root zone radius. So as you can see, if you get a couple of bigger trees on a lot, you can see how, the lot soon becomes, encumbered by these root zones, which is a function of the tree code. Basically, the code's going to tell you that you can't do certain things within proximity to the root zone, and you can't do really anything in the interior critical root zone portion. So it starts to encumber some of these lots. And in the case of this crane project, it basically presented us with a few options during the pre-application process. And then we identified the location of these trees and corresponding root zones, and basically told him that he'd need a reasonable use exception to develop the lot. So he approached us with that application, and his proposal was to remove the trees as a part of the reasonable economic use provisions of the code. And so so we took in the application, and we went through the review process that I just described for you. And we basically came back with a couple of options to present to the hearing examiner. Option one, for whatever reason, sort of dropped off right before the hearing, and I can't recall why, but it just became an option that just wasn't going to be viable. So what you see in front of you is option two, where this driveway tries to avoid the interior critical root zone as best it can. And then it's located, entirely within the critical root zone. And then a portion of the building footprint is also located in that zone, within the critical root zone of the dug fir there. You could see that the setbacks are compliant, and pretty much everything other than, its location relative to these root zones. And so we prepared our pre-filed hearing record using all of the exhibits that we collected in public comment also, and gave the examiner our recommendation, which was to basically allow for removal of the one tree southeast of this one shown here, and then retention of the tree, the 52-inch dug fir that you see on the screen here. And so, we analyzed its compliance with the criteria, and we thought we had conditioned it to a point where they can, the examiner would be able to approve it. And once we had the public hearing, there was a lot of interest by the public, and a number of people testified, including a few tree experts, arborists, licensed arborists to be in fact, and they presented new information to the examiner during the hearing process that allowed him to better understand sort of the system that was going on the site, as well as what can and can't be done within critical root zone areas, as well as interior critical root zone areas. And so basically, it was determined that the site could be developed because you had all the room to the south that was essentially outside of a lot of the critical root zone areas, but that the access to the site and the utilities that they had to provide the building, they had ultimately avoiding the root zone area was going to be impossible for both of those features, for the access feature and the utility feature. So examiner concluded that both trees could be retained if certain low impact and no dig construction techniques were used. And so he conditioned his decision to incorporate a bunch of sort of things that, I don't think we'd really expected to see out of this, but it was a pretty nifty way to sort of retain the trees and allow it to sort of comply with the tree regulations, because with these two trees, the lot was over the canopy goal coverage. And then it also demonstrated the site's ability to sort of take on these new construction techniques without like sacrificing the trees. So ultimately he decided that the house could be constructed with no dig driveway, so they weren't to excavate for the driveway at all if it was to be within the interior critical root zone. Utilities were to be installed in a trenchless fashion so that no disturbance to any of the root zones would occur. The building's footprint had to be entirely outside the interior critical root zone, and financial securities were to be posted for both during the construction process in the event that the tree's health failed, and then also during a maintenance period for which we receive yearly reports on these trees' health. And so, and they also required a few other conditions that were sort of just boilerplate conditions that get included on all reasonable use exceptions. But you know, this was a good example. If Steve wants to forward to the next slide, this was what actually came out. And you can see the difference here. It's a little grainy, but you see the driveway is a different shape, obviously. You see the building entirely outside the interior critical root zone area. You see that both trees have been retained. You see that setbacks are compliant. And so, you know, this project, I think it was a good example of how the regulations sort of steered us toward a goal of the code, and that retaining trees keeps the canopy intact on this particular lot. And the developer also got to build, you know, a house that probably wouldn't have been too much, you know, too different from what you might have seen if, you know, the trees were removed. So. Any questions?
Commissioners, does anybody have any questions about this particular case study? Commissioner Lee.
No, just a quick question about the process then. Is there an appeals, something that allows for an appeal on decision, or are the decisions final?
The hearing examiner's decision is appealable to the superior courts. They have to go to the court to appeal it.
Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Cranmer.
You'd mentioned that there's like a maintenance period.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's like making sure that whatever mitigation plans get put in place, that they actually occur. Is that?
Yeah, right. So initially we require them to bond for the actual installation. And so once we sign off on the installation pursuant to the approved mitigation plan, then it gets turned into a maintenance period. And typically it's 5 years minimum, depending on the extent of the critical area, but usually it's a minimum of 5 years. And that's the monitoring period where the wetland professional goes out and reports on the condition of the installation, how it's growing, if it's meeting its performance standards as described in the mitigation plan. And then, you know, if it's not, we instruct them to remedy the installation based on the suggestions in the wetland report. And if that doesn't get done, then we have a chance to cash in the bond and hire a contractor to do the remediation.
Okay, so there's funding that gets set aside from the get-go.
Absolutely, yeah, because you know that's preventing, you know, people from just, you know, walking away after they sell it, right?
Okay.
Nick, are those bonds apply? I understand for this property there was a bond, but is that the case for all RUEs? do all folks that have approved, the hearing examiner says, yes, go forward and do this, are they all bonded or just some of them?
I always put financial securities as a recommended condition in any recommendation that I make.
Okay, so of this chart that was provided to us, it looks like there have been 12 applications in the last, what's that, 10, 15, 16 years, and about half of them have been approved. And in all of those cases, was there a
Yeah.
bond? Okay.
No, there wasn't. There wasn't
I'm
a
not
bond.
sure if all of them have a
No.
bond. No,
No,
but
there's no bond on the older ones. What our requirement at that early on was just that they provide a contract with the show us that they have a contract with the expert who's going to do the yearly inspections.
Okay.
And so that's an area where we think that's something the planning commission could recommend that be put in the code, that there will be a financial security to make sure that those annual reports are done every year, and that the cost of doing the work necessary to make sure that whatever it is, the trees or the plantings are viable. That's probably be a good change in the code.
Okay, so like the property on 28th Street right now, is that bonded?
No, there's no bond for that, but
Okay.
we do have a good as-built for the mitigation that was put in. And so the specialist who did that as-built of all the plantings is back out there, or has been back out there, from what I understand. Nick's been talking to him about going back and doing the follow-up report, which we made the seller of the property do. And then when we get that report, then it's going to be up to the current owner to reestablish those plantings if there are plantings that have been lost.
and we should add too that these restrictions are recorded on the property's title. So that's when a buyer sees this stuff, they see the title. Well, presumably they'll read the title report, but it is within the title report that this property is subject to a monitoring period where mitigation was installed. And so that's sort of the mechanism that they become aware of it through.
Okay, and then I just have one other question about this case study. What is the monitoring period for that property on 178 that you just showed us?
I think it's 5 years, we said.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought for some reason that one was longer, like.
Yeah, we thought 5 years was appropriate because they weren't, the arborist recommended that it be a sufficient amount of time to see if anything was to affect the trees through the construction process.
Great. Okay, Commissioner Gross, thanks, Nick.
Just a question, Nick, what happens if everybody follows the rules, they do their mitigation design just perfectly and it's constructed just fine and the darn tree dies?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Nick. You can answer.
Yeah, I mean, that could happen. I mean, I guess we wouldn't, we'd have to go back and research that a little bit. I mean, I haven't had that happen. I've had a lot of success with these mitigation. Not so much with the trees, because the crane project was really the first one. But all the critical area mitigation and stuff that I've worked with, they usually, they usually design these things for success. And a lot of times I see, out of control growth when I do these inspections. So I have I see a lot of success with the mitigation plan, but I'm a little fuzzy still on the trees because of this being the first case.
Yeah, this was pretty unique. So, but we had a really good arborist on the city side, and he calculated the values of those two trees, and it came out to $60,000. So the city actually has a bank account on those trees. If those trees die within 5 years, then the city can collect the $60,000 that the arborist valued it at. And so this was all just a little bit before Nick got involved in these projects. So I'm not trying to I couldn't remember how much Nick was involved, but that is one where we did get it. I think got it done right. That we have 5 years for those trees to remain viable. So far they're doing pretty well, and it's kind of unique because it's the developer that is holding the $60,000, but the owner is the one that that now is kind of has to be careful not to damage the trees.
Commissioner Hicks, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. One just came out of Director Bennett's comments, and perhaps it's a bit philosophical, but I wonder how one values a tree. My guess is that maybe that's based off of like the lumber board feed out of.
If you don't mind, let's hold those types of questions till a
Sure.
future meeting and focus
Sure.
just on our process right now.
Yeah, okay. Then the second question is, for the reasonable use exception, is this only for new construction or does it apply to alterations? Like if somebody wants to build, they have a carport they want to convert to a garage, or they don't have.
The alterations they're already realizing economic use of the lot. So they don't have, there's no exception for that.
Okay.
And let's see, Commissioner Cranmer.
Yeah, so I was curious about if there's a threshold for when you have these mitigation plans. And say you're trying to do something in a critical area and it might create some damage when you're doing your project. Is there a threshold that you have to reach in terms of the mitigation? I mean, is it like, if you're going to give an exception, does it have to be like 100% mitigation? Is it 80%? Is it like to offset whatever it is that you're doing? Is there anything on that?
The code guides us and tells us how to mitigate for impacts to certain critical areas. In the case of reasonable use exception, if you can't meet those code requirements, then it defaults to the criteria of approval for the reasonable use exception itself. And that's sort of what Kim was getting into when these material experts participate in the hearing process. They're going to testify in whatever way that they feel is going to mitigate the impacts for the project. So that's sort of on a case-by-case basis, like Kim was explaining. I don't know if that makes sense or answers your question, but that's kind of how we work it.
Okay, so it's not like a set percentage or.
Right.
Generally,
so
yeah.
Our
If
code
there's like
explains-
like if they're taking up whatever 3,000 square feet of buffer that are going to be disturbed. The first line of mitigation is replace those 3,000 square feet of buffer somewhere else on the property. So if they can't do that, then it may be a qualitative type of. So you can improve the quality of that wetland buffer by taking out all the invasives and replanting. So it's kind of like this set of remedies that the hearing examiner uses the expert testimony to go through and figure out what is the highest and best mitigation that is not going overboard. That you can take it too far and say, well, you're going to need to build this house on stilts made of stainless steel and you can't touch ground as soon as you get within that buffer. So the hearing examiner is also going to be considering, does this set of conditions actually continue to take reasonable use of the property? So that's why we have someone like that come in and make it's like a judge. They come in and they're a land use judge, and they try to come to a reasonable decision about what can be done without extenuating harm to the environment, but still provide some reasonable use to the owner.
Commissioner Cluno, thank you, Steve. I was on mute when I said thank you the first time.
So I'm just wondering, where are we moving? What's our next step in this conversation, right? We've only got a few minutes left of this meeting, and I'm like to discuss for a few moments of what's our goal, especially for the next meeting.
Yeah, so today is just to focus on process, and then from there, I think what we said at the beginning was to start generating some questions that can help us set up our discussions in the next several months so that we understand where to put our time and attention. So with a little bit of time before I move over to public comment, I just wanted to know, do you have any other questions about process right now? Not theoretical conversations, but just that weren't sort of answered. We have the state law, we understand how the application works. Are there any questions about either of those or about enforcement just at that surface level? None. I did want to know if the reports are available. I still don't understand, who generates the reports and at what frequency, but we don't need that at this conversation.
We can send you some sample reports if you'd like. So that's why, if we get your questions, we'll send you some examples of things that will hopefully illustrate those aspects of the process.
Great. Okay, so then if there are no other comments or questions, then I think, David, the intent is that there will be a follow-up email to all of you with Attorney Pratt's presentation and with Nick and Steve's presentation, and a request that you think about the types of questions you have. We can aggregate those from each commissioner and come up with some themes that we need to plan for, to have staff, be prepared to answer those questions at our next meetings, and then also to help shape some discussion with the ultimate goal of do any of the processes that we're using here at the city level within our purview need to be changed? Do we have recommendations we would like to make to the application process that our city staff uses to execute RUEs? And are there any changes to the enforcement components of these? And so that's our ultimate goal, is to evaluate whether or not we want to recommend changes to the code that governs these RUEs. Okay. All right, with that, if there are no other questions about this, I want to end us on time. And so is that fine? Thumbs up if we can move on? Okay, cool. Then reports and announcements. Steve?
No, none from us.
Okay, great. Then I'd like to open it up for any of our community members that have hung around. Does anybody want to make no more than 3 minutes worth of comments? And if so, please raise your hand, state your name and your address, and we will gladly hear from you. Let's see, we have an esteemed community member, Mr. Julian Anderson.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
All right. Thanks for your thoughtful discussion of this RUE issue. It's been on my mind for many years, and I've been active in the Stewardship Foundation's reaction to some of the RUE proposals that have come along, particularly the crane. To see the crane reprised was kind of like revisiting a fun period of time, a year or so that the Stewardship Foundation was involved in that process. But stepping back just a little bit, I want to say that from my point of view, and I speak for me, that the strength of the constitutional right and in the city and in the state constitution, I mean, it's a big, strong right to be able to use your property regardless. And as you've discussed, and I think it gets more of a problem in Lake Forest Park than maybe other places, because for historical reasons, we have a lot of very small lots, and that the community has values environmental assets, particularly trees, and that having small lots and RUE proposals really makes it hard for a grove of trees to exist in some neighborhoods. So I think there's an underlying problem with that RUE doesn't touch. And it threatens the health of the urban forest, particularly in some sections of the city. So that's a larger kind of philosophical thing. I really liked Nick's flow chart, even though Steve picked a nit with it. And I appreciate the effort that the planning department goes into. But I perceive a danger in their process, particularly in the early parts that are not so visible to the public. And that is where the planning department is trying to give advice, helpful advice, to a member of the community or a property owner in Lake Forest Park who wants to do something on their property. And I think there's a fine line that sometimes disappears between being a consultant for a developer and being the defender of the standards of the city. And I say that without without meaning to be mean or angry at anybody, but just that because of the conversations that can occur and the way that conversations or letters can get marked up by an officer in the planning department and suggest things to the developer that the developer may not have thought of. It's almost as if there's a consultant process going on as well as a regulatory process. And I think that has some risk. So that'd be my question to pursue. But I really appreciate that you're digging into this, and I think it will hopefully not take as long as the sign ordinances, but that you will give it your attention as you started tonight. So thank you very much for your calm attention to this.
Thank you very much, Julian. Does anybody else want to make a comment here at the end of our meeting? Okay. With that, I'll close citizen comment, and for our next meeting, I will follow up with Steve so we can get a note out to each of you. We'll have, please be prepared to turn that around in short order. We'll take all the questions that are generated, and then Steve and I'll review them to make a plan for our next meeting. We'll also certainly publish the questions that have come in so you can see what one another was asking. I think that's helpful because I think since that's not a discussion, it can help trigger other questions that some of you may have. So we'll get that all pulled together and out to you at least a week before our next meeting, so you have a chance to sort of start reflecting and thinking about what we'll be discussing at our next meeting, which obviously I can't tell you right now because I don't know what your questions are. So I think with that, do you have anything else to add, Steve?
Only that we're going to interview a couple of candidates for Planning Commission, the open positions, not this week, but next week. So Chair Larson, need to talk to you tomorrow sometime about that schedule.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Let's see. I did close citizen comments, right? So we can't, I think I see Dan Benson's hand has come up, but he may have stepped away from his computer. What's the Robert's rules here, Steve?
It's up to you or commission. If you might ask commissioners if they want to have another comment.
Commissioners, are you okay to hear? Okay, thumbs up. All right, we would love to hear from Mr. Dan Benson.
Okay, thanks for taking my last minute comment. I just wanted to comment. Julian's comments triggered a thought in my mind about the tree, protecting trees in terms of a grove of trees. It seems that this RUE, based on individual properties, the granularity is a little bit off when these properties are a small part of a larger thing, such as a grove of trees, or you think about the streams, that flows through many properties. So that's something I think that it's kind of like death by 1,000 cuts. If each of these small properties say, I want to cut down my trees, or I want to do something to my part of the creek. Well, over time, if everybody's doing that, then we lose all of these valuable resources. So I think it's a good thing to consider, that these our individual properties are part of a larger, you know, organisms or larger things that we need to also protect. So anyway, just to keep that in balance. I like that comment that Julian made.
Absolutely, point taken. And I would invite any of you that were here tonight and expressed an interest, if you have questions about our RUE code or ideas, please feel welcome to submit written correspondence to the commission. We, would love to continue to hear from you at our meetings, but would also be very glad to receive any written correspondence that might inform our discussions. So, okay, with that, I'd love to take a motion from one of the commissioners on wrapping up.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? Excellent. Any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. But before you go, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your brain space as we tackle a new body of work, and congratulations to each of you for bringing our sign code almost to closure.
And thanks for your perseverance in getting here tonight.
Exactly. We'll work it out next time.
That was a pain.
Yeah.
We'll work on it.
Thanks, everybody. And Steve, I'm around this week now that the wedding's over. I'm got a lot of time, so just holler when you want to chat.
Okay, will do.
Okay.
Good night.
Take care, guys.
Thanks. So long.